Okay, so is this everybody that's here today?
Two more are on their way.
Okay, so I'm excited to share this with you all. It's, as you know, I've been working really hard to make this all happen, and you have a lot of information in the packets that Lindsay gave you. All of this information comes from our catalog that is currently being designed, and we hope will go to print April 1st. So in your folders, you have the curatorial essay that I wrote. You have the two other essays that we've included in the exhibition. One by these two young scholars writing about the museum and our sort of relationship to the Pacific Rim with a particular focus on Asia. That one's the Pacific Dialogue. And then we also have the text by Teddy Cruz and Fauna Foreman, who are also artists in the exhibition. And I'll talk a little bit about that as well. But our goal for the book in general and for the project is really to kind of showcase the geographical range of this Pacific Rim focus and to give you the sort of varying perspectives on the topic. So hopefully these texts will help you do that. And I think, Lindsay, that's it that's in the packet, right?
Yes. And did you say the PowerPoint as well?
No, I'm not talking about the PowerPoint, I'm talking about what's in their research packet that they received this morning.
Okay, that's all. Yep.
Okay. So, as many of you know, I'll just sort of tell you the story. And it's a little bit the inside story, but if you're not insiders, I don't know who is. So, about a year ago, almost a year, a little less than a year ago, Todd and I had started having this conversation as I was transitioning into my new role here, and thinking about what would make sense, because a year ago we were really thinking this next show was going to be the last show for the building. And so we wanted to think about what would make sense as far as our programming, but really focusing on our move to the future as opposed to dwelling on the past. But as someone who has always respected the exhibitions that have been on view at this institution for so many years, and all the history that this building really contains and represents for us, I felt like it was really important to recognize that. As much as Todd was really excited and interested in moving the organization forward, I felt like we couldn't really ignore that this was a big deal for us to tear down this building. It means a lot to a lot of people, this place and this location. And this history is so rich. And can you close the door a little bit more? Sure. A little, sorry. Anyhow, so I started thinking as I was given this assignment, what would make sense to as far as how we as a community could think about this moment of transition for the institution. And you know, as happens, you have these sort of ideas when I was driving to work one morning, and I was thinking about it, and it occurred to me, well, that's it. It's the pink elephant in the room, right? This idea of the building going away, and this idea of how we deal with buildings and change, and the idea that it's sort of a misconception that buildings are permanent, right? Are meant to last forever. And there's many people who have written about this, many architects and artists who have thought about this idea. And so it seemed to me also, you know, as a curator, particularly dealing with contemporary art, I think often the best way to grapple with challenging issues is to look to artists to help us not necessarily answer those questions, but to tease out the complexities of those issues. And that's really what I hoped to address in this exhibition. Fortunately, I think that, and we always knew there was a chance that it wouldn't be the last show of the building, which we all know it is not going to be. By the way, Todd, I think you all know Todd is going to speak to us after I'm done this afternoon and tell you where we are with the story of the building and all of that. But I do think the concept makes sense to think about regardless, because it is part of our story. Whatever has happened here with us this past 6 months or so, or a year or whatever, or 10 years, that this organization, I think, has long been trying to transition away from this building. And so for me, I wanted to just think about this idea of buildings and time and there's this idea of moving forward but also remembering. And for me, the title, it was challenging to come up with a title that could be open in this way, because like I said, we knew that this might not be the last show for the building. And so the concept, I think, still holds up. We're still exploring the same ideas about architecture and permanence. And so this idea of the building as ever is something that maybe has a little bit of sentimental look back, but also is also about this continuation into the future, and it's kind of open-ended on both ends, and so that's why I felt like it worked. And I also thought a lot about if the word architecture should be in the title as opposed to building, but I think what's important to me, and I guess is an important thing for you all to kind of wrap your heads around, is the difference between a building and architecture. And I've tried to really think about that in a careful way, even in the essay that I wrote. And I think that, not talking about the practice of architecture per se, and I felt like in the title it was important for me to identify that, but rather our ideas about what a building is and how it operates. So does that make sense? So a couple quotes that I've come across in my research, and you'll find them in my text as well. A building is always building and rebuilding. Architecture here is kind of, and I do not mean to say that I'm not thinking about the practice of architecture, because obviously I am, and the idea of architecture and building, those two concepts are of course linked, and so I don't necessarily use them interchangeably, but I am using the word architecture when I'm talking about these ideas. So architecture is not only designed relationally, but once built, continuously reforms in relation to the passage of time, as well as the planned and unplanned renovations wrought by the human and non-human agents it coexists with. See, in this way, a building is flow, not form. It is creative, not merely a creation. And so I like this idea of change and flow, and thinking about how we can sort of work with those ideas kind of from kind of in a point of inception. And you'll see how the various projects that I've put together come at that from different ways. Just a couple words about the kind of range of work that you'll see in the show. So actually, back to the story of me proposing this idea to Todd. So I had this idea about architecture and permanence, and he really loved it. And then from there, he thought, well, this definitely, he was excited to sort of overlay the framework of the triennial onto that concept, because originally I wasn't even thinking of it necessarily as a biennial triennial. And in that context, I think it became important to think about how culturally the idea of permanence and ideas about architecture are so different when you think about the range of cultural contexts in the Pacific Rim, in California, to Colombia, to Chile, to Korea, to China, Hong Kong, Vietnam. All these places have very different histories, very different, very complex relationships to their built environment. And so I tried to pick artists who could just offer up a range of examples of some of those perspectives and some of those histories. And this exhibition is by no means conclusive. There are probably 100 other artists that could be in this show, but given the time and the means that I was working within, these are the choices that I made. And it was hard to narrow it down to 25 artists, by the way. I think I could have, like I said, had an even bigger show, but there's reality. Anyhow, so I really worked hard to find a balance of taking into consideration this geographic kind of framework that I was working within. And also one of the things that I feel really excited about, and I think that you guys will all enjoy, is that I really feel that each of these projects offers our viewers a different kind of experience. And so I won't say much more about that, but as I talk through each of the projects, I think that'll become really clear. Okay. Also, I hope I can get through all of this in the time that we have. Okay, so the first artist is, and I'm not going to read all these quotes, you can read them all in your screen, but this artist goes by Another Mountain Man. His official name is non-artist named Stanley Wong. He is a Hong Kong-based artist. You also in your packets, you have the artist bios and their quotes. So in the catalog, in the artist section, rather than me writing a statement about each artist, I've asked each of the artists to give me a short quote or statement. So that's what you'll see in that packet that has their bios. Along with that is their quotes. And so that's the information that will be in the kind of artist section of the book. And so we have their quotes here just to give you a little feeling of where they're coming from in the PowerPoint. So anyways, Another Mountain Man he's a photographer and also a graphic designer, and he works largely in installation, but also in video and kind of environmental installation. And for us, he's going to be showing two different bodies of work. One will be a series of, he's taken many photographs of places in Hong Kong that were deserted or construction projects that never kind of got underway. And all of these spaces were abandoned and have been transformed into contemporary art centers. So reflecting this sort of massive transition that's happened in Hong Kong and the boom of the contemporary art market there. So these images of these interior spaces will be shown as a slideshow in projected format or on some video monitors. So they'll be moving images, but they're originally shot as stills. Accompanying that as part of this installation will be this series that he calls In the Beginning, something like In the Beginning There Was No Matter. To begin with, There's No Matter, which is based on a Chinese proverb. And this series was inspired by one of the locations that he photographed was a police station. I think this one is the police station. Yeah, this one. Anyway, so inside the police station that was abandoned, he came across these bulletin boards that were for him these really interesting traces of the way that a bulletin board almost doesn't even have a purpose anymore. I mean, kind of, but it's particularly in a place that had been abandoned and was once this like functioning office environment. And the way you have the traces of the shadows of the paper and the way color and light has affected the surface of the bulletin boards over time. So there are 13 bulletin board photographs, part of this series, and those will be printed at various sizes as part of this installation. The next project, and this is actually, this is an old quote, I just realized I have a new quote for her. Carmen is a really wonderful young artist from Los Angeles, and she grew up in LA. She was actually born in Guadalajara, Mexico. She immigrated with her family when she was very young. Her father was an architect and builder in Mexico, and for most of her childhood in LA, she talks about how they would go back to Guadalajara, and they were always talking about the home he was going to build there, and this sort of fantasy and idea of this place that he was going to build and the reality of their life here. And so she's done a lot of projects dealing with memory and architecture and our sort of idealistic relationship to it, or consciousness of it. So this is an installation she did based on that. And she deals with, again, floor plans and shapes of environmental situations. Another project she did, her family owns this estate, Mansión Magnolia, and her grandmother at one time decided that had been in her family for many generations, and there are all these stories of her aunties, her tias who lived there, and these three women who pretty much never left the estate. And so Carmen was always very curious, and when she would go back to Mexico and over the summer, she would visit there, but her grandmother decided that she didn't know that it was not worth it for their family to live there, but rather to rent it out for events. And so it's a place where they have birthday parties and weddings and different things, different events that happen there. So she spent time there. She lived there for 3 months and documented the way that the space was used now. So when she came here and proposed a project to us, she was really fascinated by our pavilion space, which we also use in a similar way for events and rentals and things like that. And her project was the one project that was proposed that I basically, now that we know we have to use the space again after September, her original project we're not able to do. She wanted to cut into the floor to create this grid-like pattern and grow moss in the cracks of the kind of photographic perspectival grid. So unfortunately, that much cutting and everything would have been more than we could have sort of rebuilt in time, and it didn't work, wasn't worth it. Anyhow, and I don't have images that really reflect the current project as much, but she has come up with an amazing, fantastic idea to, instead of that I'm super excited about. So she told this story, this happened just in the past couple weeks. So I went to go talk to her, we sort of had to like really figure out what the plan B, and I always said we had to have a plan B, and she was sort of trying to figure out how we could make it work. Still with this, and I love these photographs of the Nuncio Magnolia, but basically it wasn't working for her to come up with something else that felt as authentic as that original concept. And so she had gone to a gallery downtown LA, and then gone into some of the shops next door, and was this similar feeling as the actual gallery itself. And she walked in and she kind of thought she was in another contemporary gallery space, but it turns out it was a clothing boutique. And there were racks of clothing, but like very kind of like minimal and avant-garde, and very kind of curated and installed the way it was set up. And she started to think about the different lenses that we bring to looking and experiencing a space, and how this space and pavilion also has these, we can approach it in different ways. Some people approach it as an art gallery, right? The way we often do. Some people come at it as like they're looking to plan a wedding. This is what they're looking for. And the idea of like how you might look at something when you're going in, shopping for clothes as opposed to looking at art. And so her concept is actually also, she also has always been interested in the fact that on this site where the pavilion is now, used to be the sculpture garden. So her new project deals with that history a little bit more explicitly. And she's going to be painting 8 different large-scale murals that will hang floor to ceiling, where she's created textile patterns inspired by the sculptures that used to be on the old sculpture garden there. And over the course of the exhibition, she will be cutting clothing patterns out of these 8 different, she calls them mantas, which means hanging fabric, or just fabric, basically. Anyway, so there'll be 8 mantas, and she'll be cutting the clothing patterns out of them. And she, and both her mother and her grandmother are they're seamstresses, and so she's going to be working with them to sew these garments. Then we're specially designing garment racks that will basically transform the pavilion over the course of the installation into a pop-up clothing boutique. Visitors will be allowed to try them on. We're going to hopefully, I'm working with Albert and Adrian to transform the artichoke into a dressing room. And she will be there throughout the run of the exhibition, probably a couple days a week, cutting the fabric. So by the end of the exhibition, hopefully there will be nothing left of the mantas. They'll just be the tattered remains of the fabric and those patterns. So really about that transformation over time. I'm super excited. I think, the first project would have been spectacular, but I feel like this one is equally as wonderful. So she's a really exciting artist, and I'm excited to show her work. Michelle Aislinn is also a wonderful discovery. She's a photographer based in LA as well. And she has been, she for many years was actually an editorial photographer, shot for many magazines, Vanity Fair, New York Times, had many important journalistic photographic works, and in recent years has transitioned to work more in the fine arts realm. This project is basically, I don't know if any of you have heard of Hollywood Park or ever been there, but she was invited to photograph Hollywood Park for the 2 weeks before it was demolished. And so she spent a lot of time there dealing with the people and the environment. It was a racetrack, a horse racetrack, and so much of that activity happened in the pre-dawn hours, getting the horses up, and so there's a wonderful kind of darkness to these images. She groups them mostly together, but it deals with the history of this place, but also the people, which is an important, you'll notice that actually this is one of the few projects in the entire exhibition that shows you any human beings. I didn't do that necessarily on purpose, but But people are important. They're just not represented in their human form. they come up in different ways. And often the visitor is the stand-in for the person in these installations and projects. Anyway, so yeah, there's some wonderful images, and she shows them in these clusters that create these sort of relationships between the kinds of imagery and the different kinds of people that inhabited and contributed to the context and culture around Hollywood Park. This next artist, Cedric Longford, is from Vancouver, Canada, but he lives in Victoria now. And Cedric actually trained as a photographer, studied under Jeff Wall, and oh my gosh, I'm blanking on the other really important Canadian kind of avant-garde photographer. Anyways, he thinks about photography and from a very conceptual perspective. And photography actually is an important part of his practice that is now based largely in this idea of construction. And he talks a lot about learning through building and conceptualizing through building. And he makes these structures that are kind of large scale and engage with architecture in different ways. He made this barge that was floated around between Vancouver and Seattle for a few years. And you'll see that on the exterior of the barge, oh yeah, here, there's this kind of gray surface here is actually a photographic wrap, a vinyl wrap that sometimes you see on construction sites when a building is going up, what the building might look like or things like that. So he's playing with the vernacular of architecture and construction on different levels, and that's going to be part of the project he's going to do for us. Often, he works with, often with his father, who's an engineer, and his brother sometimes helps. And so all of his structure, many of his structures are intended for people to climb and experience. This is an image that he's using as a source, perhaps, for the project he's going to do with us. So here's what he's going to do with us. And I don't know how this is going to work, particularly for kids yet, but when he was here, I did so a lot, instead of me traveling to all these places, because I was asking artists to respond to our site and our context, we invited artists to come here for site visits. And I think I went on, I don't know, how many different tours of the building with Albert, and at a certain point, Albert got really excited about taking people up to the roof. And Cedric was one of the later ones, and so Albert, by then, was like, yeah, let's go to the roof, everybody likes to go to the roof. And of course, Cedric loved the view from the roof. He was really interested in, he'd never been to Southern California, and like Southern California suburbia was very exotic to him. We went like way out into Irvine where they were building new homes and all the model homes, and that whole concept and all of that new construction was really fascinating to him. And the view from the roof gave him this really interesting perspective that he thought offered just this range of context for our situation, very specifically here, and really all the various changes that are happening in the landscape and the environment in this particular location. And so he went back, and we had initially been talking about something like this, right, that he might build in our courtyard or something ambitious but not super crazy. Anyway, so he came back and he said he wanted to build a pavilion on the roof. And that was not going to fly. So what we were able to compromise, though, is, the courtyard off of Gallery 9, where there's the glass doors. He's going to build a viewing tower. So visitors will enter this structure out of scaffolding, out of construction scaffolding. We're going to hire a scaffolding company. It'll be a 30-foot tower, and it will be clad in the vinyl wraps, right? Inspired by, I think he's going to use some of his photographs that he took of these rocket launch sites in the north of Canada, but also photographs that he took, I think, when we were traveling around and exploring new suburbia in Irvine. But anyways, I'm not exactly sure, to be honest, what the imagery is going to be yet. We're still working that out. But we've been able to settle on a design. Our visitors will have to sign waivers to climb up onto the scaffolding. So I don't know how that's going to work with school kids, but I imagine it might not work to drag a class of 12 or 15 kids up the scaffolding. As fun as that would probably be for them. But anyways, but I think it will be a really interesting project, and I'm excited. And one of the other things that I really tried to do with this show is to get the art into every space of the building, the front, the sides, the back, the unused places. And so I really worked on that. Santiago Borja he's one of these artists that I have wanted to work with this guy forever. He's they're all, the other rule I had for this show, because I was working on such a short timeline and all the various restrictions, is that no prima donnas in the show. They're all really lovely people. Santiago is someone that I've known for a little while and was very excited to work with him. I really love his work, and he's just a lovely person. He came here, and we were thinking of so many different things. We spent a lot of time at the Noguchi Sculpture Garden and thinking about all different, so his work often deals with high modernism. Oh, that's weird. What's on that slide? And the sort of he kind of creates these juxtapositions between thinking about the symbolic potential of architecture, high modernism, and indigenous culture. So, and these various sites, sorry, this slide's a little fuzzy, looks like. He's kind of brought these two cultural influences together. For our project, he proposed many different things, like I said, and finally we settled on this one piece that I think is really subtle. I mean, what I love about his work is that there are these kind of singular, bold gestures, but I think they really are effective and beautiful. So he was thinking about, again, the context of our site and our building, and there's sorry, I just want to find it. There's architecture historian Adolf Loos, who has this quote. I don't know if I can find it exactly, but let's see if it's in here. Not exactly. Okay, sorry. Anyways, there's an Adolf Loos quote that Santiago was inspired by the idea of the first architecture. You come across a mound of earth 3 feet by 6 feet, and that's architecture. This idea about architecture perhaps always being tied to life and death and mortality. And I thought that there's something so impactful and powerful in that statement. So his project is going to be in Gallery 1, which he wanted, but first we were talking about tombs and all of these different kinds of ancient architectural structures where there's sort of like this interior chamber, right, where the sort of treasure lies in a way. We were talking about all different histories, but anyhow, so we decided Gallery 1 was the most kind of powerful location for his installation. So we're going to cut a 3 by 6 foot rectangle. And then dig out the earth. There will be a mound of earth, as well as a poster that showcases, has the quote. He's designing a poster, kind of a free takeaway, a la Felix Gonzalez Torres poster. I mean, hopefully some of you know what I mean. Just a stack of posters that people will be able to take that will have the quote, as well as there's this really interesting image that he's found of Adolf Loos's own tomb. So these sort of layers of reference and symbolism. Another artist who I think for me is someone that I encountered 12 years ago, and when she was a student, a graduate student at UCLA. She's since then gone on. She's from Colombia and lives and works in Bogota and shows quite extensively all over the world, actually. But I've been interested in Leila's work for some time, and I think in many ways, I probably should have said this at the beginning, but I have long had this interest in the relationship between art and architecture, particularly dealing with time and memory. And Leila, I realized as I was researching the show, I had kind of almost forgotten about her work, but then sort of rediscovered her. I think I did a studio visit with her in 2005, and in many ways that kind of sparked some of my curiosity on this topic. So I often like to say that exhibitions sort of live in a curator's mind for a long time before they kind of come together, and I think she definitely played into that. So I was really excited to remember her work and to be able to work with her. So she often deals with almost treating buildings like archaeology and excavating the various surfaces and layers, whether cutting into walls or scraping away at things. This is an old cinema space that she worked with in Bogota. And then also this question of putting things back together, almost also akin to the way an archaeologist would sort of pull things apart or to make discoveries and then attach sort of fragile threads that would connect them. Recently, she had a project in Miami where she extracted the layers of paint from a gallery wall, and so her project that she's going to do here is going to follow that same technique, pulling away some layers of paint from some of our galleries and then creating an installation and construction. We're still kind of working on exactly what that will be because her initial project was also kind of relating to the story of the museum, and she's had a couple big shows the past month, I think. So I'm hoping to get her attention soon and really nail down the project. The other thing, when she was here, we went to the Cooper Center. Have any of you ever heard of the Cooper Center? It's an archaeology and paleontology research center affiliated with Cal State Fullerton in Santa Ana. And we had an amazing, because she often does do research, kind of real archaeological research. Anyways, and they were wonderfully generous, and we looked at all different artifacts and things, and she was kind of curious about the geological history of this particular location. And some of that may work its way into the project. One thing we're looking into, for example, they have prehistoric sand that if they just look like buckets of sand, and they're like, I don't know, tens of, not hundreds, but like many, many buckets of sand laying around at this place. And each little granule is actually a tiny little fossil. So we're looking into maybe borrowing some of that sand in some capacity. So that's still coming together. Cesar Cornejo is a Peruvian artist. He also currently teaches in Tampa, but he travels back and forth and does a range of different projects that kind of veer from the sculptural to the socially engaged. One of my favorites, the one that he became most recognized for was this project that, called Puno, that he calls Puno Moca. Puno is the town in Peru where he lived and lives. And he basically worked with people in their different homes to basically renovate their homes and in exchange for kind of transforming them into a contemporary art, MoCA, Museum of Contemporary Art. And then these individuals became the museum director of these spaces. And had to, have hours where people would be able to be invited to come in and view the different kinds of installations that some artists made in their renovated homes. He also, as I said, works in a really sculptural way. He thinks a lot about the intersection between the kind of stuff of museums and architecture and indigenous and third world architectural practices, and the kind of resourcefulness of forced resourcefulness of the sort of socioeconomic divide. So using materials that in some contexts, oh, that's so weird.
That's very interesting.
Super strange in this moment.
So are these,
image and it just totally disappeared.
are these interiors of some places that he has worked on architecturally? Is that what we're looking at?
I'm sorry?
I'm asking if these photos are of interiors of buildings that he has worked on.
These are some examples of sculptures that he's made.
Oh, I see.
And using some of the kind of throwaway materials of museum practices. So for example, for us, we have a bunch of acrylic hoods that went on top of pedestals. That when he was here, somehow it came up in conversation with Albert that Albert has all of these transparent boxes that we need to get rid of. And Cesar was like, no, I will use those. Let's make something out of those. So we measured, I don't know, like 45 different acrylic hoods that have been in a storage facility that we've been paying for off-site. And instead of throwing them out now, he's going to make them into a sculpture. Like some of these things are made from recycled materials. And there was another one that I had an image of, but somehow it's gone. It was here a minute, it was right here a minute ago. Anyway, but some of these things show you some examples of the way he's working with materials. And the project that he's going to make for us will combine these kind of topographic maps and the sort of abundance of materials that we consider, throwaway, that he's going to transform into a sculpture. The other really interesting thing is he became fascinated by the way our building has been remodeled and repurposed. This idea of repurposing, I think, is interesting relative to his work. So the various ways that galleries have changed function over the years. So his installation is going to take place in what was the back storage space of the museum's store. Originally, with the original design of the museum, that was actually a gallery. So it's set up, it has a lighting track, it has, you can tell the spaces in the museum that have floorboards, right, that were initially designed as public spaces, they're finished spaces. So there'll be an installation in the Pacific Project room where the Helen Pashkin is now. We're going to open up the door that used to be there and take off the black window in the front of the museum, and you'll be able to look into that space from the outside and see Cesar's sculpture. And also, and it's now over the years, it's like there's a little rough. It has like, I think, our server box, so we'll have to cover the server with the box. And some things won't be finished, but some things will clearly be a gallery. So he's also sort of speaking to that sense of repurposing space in our building and the way we've done that over the years. How am I doing on time? All right, I'm only in the C's. There are a lot of people early in the alphabet, though. So. Okay, so Beatrice is another wonderful artist, born in El Salvador, living and working in Los Angeles. She is one of those people, I'm super excited to work with all of these artists, but she's definitely someone at an exciting juncture in her career, and I think you'll be seeing a lot of her. She works also thinking about history and the relationship of modernism and architecture and history and materials, and a kind of, particularly a kind of cultural dynamic. This is a project that she did with these, cairns, the sort of markers made out of lava rocks. And this idea of materials and standing the test of time and the sort of juxtaposition of the architecture to this form. She is making this amazing project for us, inspired by the research she's done of this man, Dan Montalongo, who had Apache Native American heritage. She lives in a neighborhood in north of Los Angeles, in San Fernando, where there are these amazing houses. There's like close to 100 of them that this man, Dan Montalongo, built in the early 20th century, like before 1920. And they're all these beautiful craftsman homes that have this very particular style of the way river rocks have been used in their construction. And it became like, it was this very kind of posh rancher community out there. And I went out there to see them, and it's amazing. It's this weird little, very still ranch feeling, kind of remote, kind of mellow little neighborhood. But over the years, it was a place where, maybe Hollywood elite or whatever would go out and have their sort of ranch homes. And over the years, of course, San Fernando and the economics and the sort of cultural transitions that have happened in that part of the North Valley has become more of a working class neighborhood. So these are the kinds of things that Beatrice is really exploring. She has proposed to rebuild, she discovered that she thinks the house next door to her, which is now owned by a Lakota woman, she's also interested in these native, the sort of histories of different cultural influences. She thinks it's interesting that Dan Montalongo was Apache, this woman who lives in the house next door to her is Lakota, but different. She's a very working class. I think she might be a nurse, something like that, and works really hard. Her family, many generations have lived in this house. Anyways, Beatrice is rebuilding this entire front porch out of metal, hand welded. People will be invited to climb up onto it. It will look almost like a stage set. And she works a lot with, God, it's so weird. I just had an image right here and it went away.
There.
I don't know what happened. All right, anyway, so she works a lot with metal. And in a way, the front will appear completely finished, but then you'll be able to see that it's a construction from the side and almost this sort of theatricality of the piece. There's another example of another project she did. Also dealing with ideas about utopia and our sort of relationship to architecture and history and memory. So I mentioned Teddy Cruz and Fauna Foreman, who worked together as a studio Cruz and Foreman. Teddy Cruz is a practicing architect. Fauna Foreman is a political science professor and academic. They work together in the region of Tijuana and San Diego and think very much about the idea of things always, this potential to transform, and the idea of adaptability being designed into buildings from their inception. So one thing, I'll talk about this a little at the end, but I guess I could have mentioned it, but one sort of overarching theme I've had, or concept I've been thinking about as I put this exhibition together, is that many of the projects kind of fall along a temporal spectrum, some looking at the past, archaeology, history, the ruin, others kind of moving into the present, the idea of tracing the past, recording the present in a way, memorializing. And what I was really excited about their work to bring into the exhibition was this idea of moving, of always considering the future potential of transformation. So it's again sort of moving towards this future. That concept, as I described about the title, the as ever concept. And so they, their installation will involve graphics like this. This is an image of an installation they did at SF MoMA. And this project, and we'll really showcase this project that they've done recently. They've worked quite extensively in a particular slum in Tijuana, right along the San Diego border, where there happens to be a factory there that builds shelving for shipping pallets. So for many years, they've been working to collaborate with these people. Many of the people that own this factory, many of the people who live in this community actually work at this factory. And this practice of using different components to these sort of adaptable structures that grow and change as families grow and change and different individuals' needs adapt. They wanted to design something that people could use that would allow for that kind of adaptability to sort of be modular and adapt and move and change as necessary, which was already happening anyway, but to support that in a way that was safer and actually giving people more options and opportunities. So they worked with this company, and they've been able to develop these prototypes, and they're working with a handful of families who are, what's the word, that are like case studies or some potential like people to try this out. Anyways, and they're going to be doing this project, and we'll hear more from them. Both of them are also writers, and they speak extensively on the topic. And so for me, when I wanted them, as I went to go meet with them, just to explore the way that we could perhaps involve them in the project, I like the idea of showing this in the show because I think it's such an interesting topic and brings something different that the other projects don't bring. But I also felt like it was important to have, they also talk about this concept of adaptability and transformation, and particularly in Latin American architecture and building context, that I thought could lend something interesting to the book. So they kind of are playing various roles in the book, or in the project, which I actually really like. I don't mean to favor them more than others, but I think that to get the full understanding of what they're coming from, I think this idea of writing and text is important. So you'll hear more. It's so weird. All of a sudden slides are disappearing from my PowerPoint, and I'm not doing anything, so I don't know what's going on, but anyhow, so I'm going fast. I'm sorry, there's a lot of information. Ken Ehrlich is a Los Angeles-based artist who works in many different forms, but this particular project is one really based in research that he's done about this man named Donald Wilbur. Wilbur was an architecture historian affiliated with Princeton. He also was basically like a secret agent, CIA operator who worked in Iran and was very involved in basically the 1953, I believe. I have it here. So he worked as a CIA intelligence officer from the 50s through the 80s, and he was a key organizer of the 1953 coup that overthrew the Shah. So what was fascinating to me about this research that Ken was doing, that this history, this intense Cold War history, was so tied to this sort of ideology around architecture and preservation, and that this was his cover, was preserving this history in this very kind of academic way. And so Ken's work basically takes Wilbur's photographs and he superimposes some of the documents. So Wilbur later wrote this sort of tell-all autobiography and these classified documents that were released. And so some of this text is laser cut onto these images. Oh, and there's another one of his drawings that for some reason it's disappearing from my PowerPoint. Sorry about that. I have no idea what's going on here. There's a pretty telling one there. That one's just a photograph. I don't think it needs other text. Wilbur also made a lot of drawings of some of these locations that were being destroyed, and I think the strange conflicts of like his role in this history and the transformation of this culture. And so Ken has redrawn some of these architectural drawings, these sort of idealized, almost this imperialist perspective on these gardens and things like that. This is our little, very political corner. I mean, there's definitely a lot of politics that run through many of these projects, which you'll see. Patricia Fernandez was born in Spain and also lives in Los Angeles now. Her project, so she works a lot exploring her family's history to Spain and Spanish history, and her parents grew up under Franco, and the way that information and histories were told and preserved. She creates many installations trying to unpack that history that in her family was just very, they just sort of didn't talk about it very much, but she did all these projects with her grandfather and different things, and letter writing and lots of research-based work. So her project is studying this history, in particular called this place called Rodeo Iberico, which was a bookstore, but also a printing press that you can see here. Her father frequented this bookstore in the 60s as a student. Oh my God. I don't know what is going on with this PowerPoint. It's so weird. Anyways, I just lost some more images. In Spain. And so this was a location where, text was being disseminated and these sort of leftist political texts were being shared among different people who were not able to have access to that information and that history and the sort of theoretical writing and things. And for her father, that was very important. So as when she was a college student, it was very important in the United States at that point, it was important to her family that she go to Paris to study as well. It just so happened that as a student, when she went to go study at the Sorbonne, there was this building where students were living, where she went to live, and it was in the same building, this Rue de la Train, where this bookstore once existed. And she only realized that later, in talking with her father about the history of this bookstore and what it meant to him, that she had lived in that same building as well as a student. So over the past few years, she's been researching this location and trying to understand this history that's very covered up and all these different people, and there's all this mythology around it. And so anyways, her project will involve these 4 watercolor pieces, unpacking the various layers of this history, and will also include a sculptural component, which is this staircase, which is building a replica of this spiral staircase that there once was an image of here, but there's not any longer. So weird, I'm really sorry. The staircase was a place where people often sat in the bookstore and read because they couldn't pay attention. Yuki Kimura is a Japanese artist who is Doing this project, this text is actually, it's the one kind of unusual one. She works in between photography and buildings and space and deals with memory. Hers is among the more abstract projects in the show, but still is rooted in a personal history. So her family recently sold their home of 4 generations in Kyoto to a hotel. And this is from the hotel's website, promoting this neighborhood in Kyoto. And so these are some examples of earlier works of hers. Well, that was, let's see, okay, well, I had more images, but the project she's gonna do for us, she's been doing these projects she salvaged these wardrobes from her family's home that were in her bedroom as a child. And she's been using them to create different installations with mirrors and sculptural elements, photography, and her installation here will include all of those things as well as some videos. So playing with like a more sculptural perspective and imagery of her family in her home.
Well, it's going to be a full kind of war sculpture, similar to the wardrobes, or what is the?
Yes, we've shipped 3 wardrobes from Japan to be on view here. And the installation will include, she's given us the plans to build a skylight that was once in the house in Kyoto. So the way she's described it, the wardrobes will form like a wall dividing the space, and one side is the sculpture, the other side are the images. So there'll be projected images, videos, 35mm slide projections, also slides, photographs she's taken of details of the house and her family and different things like that. So she'll be coming to install that. So there are a handful of details I'm not 100% certain about, but we're getting all the elements in place, getting the mirror cut to the right length, and trying to build what she calls the light object. I keep telling her it's a skylight, but she doesn't like the skylight. Olga Comodoros is a LA-based artist. She actually studied as an economist and a lawyer before becoming an artist, and her work is really grounded in questions around labor and agency, economics, and socioeconomic discrepancies. She also came and did a tour of the site, and in talking with us, and her quote was one that our editor was really not to touch. It's almost a poem. And she's this idea of the body and the relationship between the architecture and the social body and the body in general. But anyways, when she was here, Albert ended up telling her this. Every time Albert gave a tour, it was like somehow some new bit of information came out. And I'm thinking I need to convince him, but I'd like Albert and Olga to do a tour, a walkthrough of the building as a public program, because there's always something new. Anyway, so Albert told Olga the story of how there was once an employee that worked here who was a janitor. And after work one night, he got in his car to drive home and he had a heart attack and he passed away in the parking lot. Many of you might know him. Anyway, so we've actually reached out to his widow to see, to see if we could get permission to reference his experience here in the project. We haven't heard back, but so her project, and she deals a lot with questions around home and history, and like I said, these sort of socio-political questions. Another picture disappeared. So, I don't understand what's happening. Anyhow, so what Olga has proposed to do is to kind of create a memorial to the workers who have worked here in the building. So all of us in various forms, from janitors to curators to whatever. And she is going to make a sculptural installation that will, she's been talking about the image that I had for you here, is another photograph. This is so weird, I'm really sorry. Something she made out of glass, these sculptures she made. And it will be a kind of amorphous glass form, referencing perhaps an elbow. And for her idea about glass, it's the solid that's closest to liquid, so this idea of something transforming over time and having this kind of amorphous quality. But it will be embedded into the front desk, the security desk in the front of the museum. So it'll be literally inserted into the architecture of the building, the place where the sort of workers, when you, as a visitor, encounter the space, sit. The other components of her installation will include the letter we wrote to the man who passed away, his widow, as well as a contract that she is sending to Todd very soon. The contract will state that she wants to give this piece to the museum, and under the condition that it always, once it leaves its location here on view in this exhibition, it always be situated either in or in proximity to the director's office, so that the director, any director of this institution, must always be reminded of his or her responsibility to the labor that comes together to make a museum operate. Lead Pencil Studio from Seattle, Amy Hahn and Dan Mahalio. Two fabulous artists that I've worked with before, actually, and they usually do these large-scale, really dynamic installations. They deal a lot with surface and volume, void space, negatives and positive space. Oh my God. Exteriority, interiority, and the sort of conflations of architecture in that way. The project that they're going to do for us, they became fascinated by thinking about the way real estate is evolving in and around the museum, and thinking about, they've often been fascinated by parking lots and this sort of potential, this sort of vacant, in-between potential or transitory potential of what they think of as perhaps void space of parking lots. So they're actually, they work with, another part of what they do is they work with these, they're called LiDAR scanners. I don't know if anyone has heard of them, but they're these crazy cameras that can scan space. They've scanned like the entire Brooklyn Bridge or crazy in-depth environments, and you can measure the exact volume of places. So anyways, they're going to do these LiDAR scanners, and they can show the scans in these three-dimensional crystalline forms. So also referencing our connection to Fashion Island and the mall, they're going to do these scans of parking lots and create a cityscape that will be shown as these little these are small little crystalline structures that will be displayed in kind of jewel cases, like you might find in, Neiman Marcus selling jewelry, something like that. And we'll also show a handful of their drawings, which amazingly, they're two people and they make these drawings together, which I always think is incredible. So I think that kind of speaks for itself. Renee Lochnero, also a Los Angeles-based artist who thinks a lot about the ruin and ideas about entropy. She often blends together photography with sculpture, and she's going to be doing an installation on the exterior of our building, a little bit like this one here, which was a proposal she did for the Museum of Modern Art in Ireland, where see how in this building you can kind of see where one building is sort of creeping in and taking over, an older building is creeping in and taking over a newer kind of architectural form. So she'll be doing that kind of at the front entrance with some imagery, and she's hadn't quite shared with me. She wrote to me last week that she finally found the building she wants to use as her inspiration to kind of take over our building, but we haven't gotten there yet. So this is a really lovely installation she did in a small town in Italy where these are actually all photographs along these little steps here, just sort of subtle intervention into the space. Sabelle Lyle is a San Francisco-based artist, and she, so like I said, each of these projects are going to give the viewer a really different experience. She works a lot with kind of, in the most, a pretty abstract way dealing with architecture, but suggesting planes in space, creating environments, and kind of giving a kind of gesture towards, oh my God, it's so weird, abstraction. Her project will incorporate video projections as well as these kind of suggested walls. And Ronald Moran is from El Salvador. He has also shown extensively around the world, and he works often with string to create these very even though there's a sort of similar feeling, I would say, in some ways, to Sibel's work, his is much more concrete and less abstract. Or maybe not much, but somewhat more concrete. Often creating these installations with string. I don't understand what's happening. It's so weird. I'm really sorry. Creating installations with string that give you kind of like a ghost of an architectural form. Alongside that, we'll show some of his drawings that he does, these sort of layers of acrylic, different patterns and shapes over iconic. These are some images drawings he did over Tadeo Ando buildings. So again, these like high modernist architectural forms or buildings and kind of creating these sort of different ways of coming at them, opening them up into another possibility, another orientation.
So what is his particular piece here going to be like? Sorry, I don't quite follow you. What is he going to have here at the museum?
We're going to show a series of these drawings, a new series of drawings along these lines, as well as an installation made out of string. We're talking about an archway that he'll make out of white string that will be sort of ghost-like in these white bricks. The image that unfortunately was here was of a white brick wall installation that he did. So I am sorry, I don't know what's going on with my PowerPoint. But Trong is a Vietnamese artist, born in Vietnam, came to the United States actually when he was 4 years old, and as a child lived in a number of different places with his family. And he did this body of work where he's dealing, thinking about memory, location, dislocation, cultural assimilation, and these sort of layers of culture and time over and relating to our built environment. So he took these different family photographs and he translated them into these sort of childlike coloring book pages. And they're oil paintings that are then collaged on top of photographs of the various locations his family has lived over the years. He also now has been living back in Vietnam, and he's become fascinated with the iron grates on old colonial. Oh my God! So, oh, I'm sad. That was my movie. Anyway, I don't know why they're disappearing. It's so bizarre. Anyways, there are some really beautiful images that I was just going to show you of some of these window grates that he has. Basically, they'll be the newer ones that he's done are suspended in space, and they follow these patterns. And he is now painting them with the kind of almost as if the sun is hitting the window in a certain way. And some have different forms, reference certain historical moments in Vietnamese history even. And they're all looking at these kind of French colonial architectural influences on buildings in the form of these amazing iron grates that are on many buildings in Ho Chi Minh City that he refers to as Saigon. Nancy Pop is an LA-based artist. She doesn't really work with objects. She's really based in more social practice and performance. She is often known for these climbs that she has done sort of illegally in public spaces. At one point, I was just going to show you an image, but it disappeared. She climbed the road when it was under construction and got arrested. She's also interested in buildings and construction, and when I described Cedric's project with the scaffolding to her, she immediately wondered if she could climb. The project she's going to do for us is based on work she did last summer and research she did actually in Brazil, and where she was collaborating with an artist collective and activist group that were working, many communities were displaced for all the new construction they were doing for the Olympics in Brazil. And so she worked with this group that were actually successful in working together as artists and activists to advocate for new housing and to help support these people that were being kicked out of their homes. So she's been working she works a lot with tenants' rights and issues around displacement and dislocation in Los Angeles, and she's collaborating with different community organizations in LA, in Orange County as well. And so for the exhibition, she'll be having an installation where there'll be some of the videos and films from her experience in Brazil. We're going to have public programs, maybe film series, and that will be her contribution to the exhibition. She also makes these hammocks that are kind of collaborative projects that she's done, and so there'll be some hammocks on display, one in the gallery where people will be invited to sit and read some information that she'll be providing, and another outside that will not be for people to lay on, but just sort of to reference her project. Pilar Canteros is a Chilean artist, actually the youngest artist in the show. She's does really fascinating work and has a wonderful sense of humor, which is, I think, what drew me to the work. She often studies historic buildings that have disappeared, kind of resuscitating these histories and drawing attention to sort of the fractures or slippages of memory that we might have. A project she did in Kiev, in the Ukraine. She was nominated for an important prize there, the Future Artist Prize. That was another image that disappeared. This is very bizarre. Anyway, so Pilar, and often they involve these sort of performative gestures and things, kind of getting at the absurdity of the sort of grandeur of architectural forms and ephemeral sort of challenge of piecing together history after it's been lost.
What is that photograph?
This is part of the project she did in Kiev.
Yeah.
So she'll be coming here for a month, actually, and over that course of time, she is going to be researching the China House that was built in 1912 or 1914 in Newport Beach, and also the history of the Chinatown in Santa Ana that was burnt down deliberately in 1906. And she's hoping to make a model of the China House, and she'll do a performance where she'll drag the house to various locations made out of balsa wood or some kind of architectural model material. And so she'll make a film. She was in the Sao Paulo Biennale recently, and she also does these sort of documentary films where she interviews people and kind of records her own experience doing research, and again getting at this sort of fine line between fact and fiction as you're putting together these very subjective histories, and so it remains to be seen exactly what the end result will be. But she's going to make a film, and in the end, that will also have the remnants of her sculpture that she'll do these kind of performative gestures. Bryony Roberts, many of these people also studies as architects. Bryony is one of them. She actually teaches architecture. She's from LA. This year she happens to be teaching at Columbia in the architecture department. She does a range of different kinds of projects. I was lucky enough to see this performance in the Mies van der Rohe Plaza in Chicago last year. It was a stunning piece that she did about, with a collaboration with the high school marching band, really about the symmetry and kind of space of that location. This is at the Neutra House in Los Angeles. This is in Rome, where she worked with the floor and kind of did this sort of subtle adjustment. For our project here, she's been working with a fabricator to cast the concrete exterior of the building. And so we're working on creating these kind of forms that will hang in the windows, the entrance of the lobby of this cast form. It's been a little bit challenging working with the materials, and we've had to go through a lot of different trials and stuff, so we're still working on what that will be. I don't know where these images. Alex Slade is a photographer based in Los Angeles. He's been documenting all of the incredible increase in construction, massive construction projects that are really transforming the downtown Los Angeles landscape. And now the images are all disappearing. You'll have to wait to see what Alex is doing. But he thinks a lot about the way that cities evolve, and construction plays into that. They're really beautiful, large format photographs. Supercritical Mass is a collaborative duo from Australia. They've been here off and on. They both came out in October, and Julian has been spending some time in New York, so he's been here a little bit more. And he's actually coming back this week. They work with different groups of people, collaborations. They're both classically trained composers. They're incredible musicians. And they create compositions using architectural space. So and sometimes with musical instruments, sometimes, oh, you're got to be kidding me. Well, with things as simple as a coin. Another image that we lost was with someone kicking a very small china bowl. And that is relative to the project they're going to do here, because when they came here, we did all kinds of experiments in the space. I mean, it's, as you well know, it's a very resonant space. Sound really travels in those galleries. And so they were responding to that and thinking about using the floor as this kind of common ground and almost as an instrument. And so actually on Thursday, I sent you guys all an email about this. I hope you guys got that email. Thursday, Julian's coming back this week, and we're having an informational meeting. We're looking for people to volunteer to participate in their project. The idea is that Thursday we'll have this sort of informational meeting, get a sense of who would participate, and then they're going to be doing a performance for the camera on the 11th and 12th of April. They'll do a performance following the opening on May 6th, and then they'll also have an installation that will include, there'll be a video and then a kind of space within the gallery that will be designated for visitors to be able to play with those things. It's a little bit tricky to explain without being able to experience it, so I'll save our time for when we do the walkthrough, but you'll see it'll involve everyday objects and mirrors and being able to play in the space. They basically create these scores to use all kinds of objects to make sound. Wang Wei is a Chinese artist. He lives and works in Beijing. And he also deals with, he actually was trained in mosaics, and so he works in tile usually, and thinks a lot about the way this sort of very solid form of tiles can get at a precariousness of permanence in buildings. So he's done many projects inspired by the old Beijing Zoo. This is an example. Inserting tiles into a natural environment. That's actually a real natural environment. The project he's going to do for us, and this is not the best image unfortunately, but is it's called Slipping Mural. It's from the tortoise enclosure at the old Beijing Zoo. And it's literally just the mural of these birds that is in the background of this tortoise exhibit at the zoo, but it appears as if it's just sliding off the wall. Hei Yang is an artist in Korea. She's probably the most internationally renowned artist in the show, but I'm really excited to be able to show this body of work of hers. She's often known for this image, for this kind of work that you don't see here, which is these vast installations she does using leveler blinds, you know, the blinds that you really raise and lower. She also has been doing these installations recently, dealing with, they're called opaque wind, and obviously air conditioner units and cinder blocks in different locations. For her, this has a personal history. This is the version of the opaque wind project that we're going to be showing. As a child in Korea, actually, I was interested, I didn't know this, but many Koreans went in the 70s to go work in all the new construction that was happening in the Middle East. And for her family, her father was one of those construction workers and then would come back, and it was this sort of kind of intense experience because, you know, he would go there and the kind of difficult cultural adaptation that he experienced when coming back, and in Korean culture, you know, sharing those kind of difficulties is not something that's commonly done. So there was like this opacity to that experience in her life, this block of how this happened. And so she originally was commissioned to do this project for a biennial in the Middle East. And so looking at Middle Eastern architecture and those kind of influences and thinking about those forms, but then using very, you know, traditional kind of mundane, outmoded air conditioning units and really boring everyday cinder blocks and materials.
So what dates are this? I mean, because she has definitely quite a career already, and so what dates would she do?
This is a brand new piece that this was a show she had at a gallery in New York last year, and we're going to be reconstructing it here. So here are some key points for you guys, kind of to wrap things up. I'll just read them, and they're kind of excerpted from the text that you already have. But the exhibition aims to explore our understanding of time relative to architecture and the built environment. It takes as its starting point the misguided idea that buildings are designed to last forever. By viewing architecture as an organic enterprise, the exhibition explores ways of accepting the contingency and temporal precariousness of a building. I know it sounds complex, but if you break it down, I'm sure you'll get it. The exhibition also considers how cultural specificity, especially given the broad range of cultures around the Pacific Rim, affects the understanding of permanence. Each project explores how each artist from each specific vantage point or cultural context interprets and responds to the questions of permanence relative to the built environment. And the last is this idea of the temporal spectrum that I was talking to you guys about. The temporal spectrum also serves as an underlying and overlapping conceptual principle. Some projects dwell in the past, exploring ideas of death, decay, entropy, and ruin. Others push into the present, considering ideas about marking, or preserving elements of buildings. At the other end of the spectrum are projects that address future potential, investigating and embracing adaptability and transformation. So, that is everything.